Welcome, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Amanda Nash. I work with the Heart and Stroke Foundation as their health promotion and nutrition manager. I am a dietitian by trade, and I also have a certificate in adult education. I'm very passionate about talking about healthy living, healthy behaviors, not only specifically for the individual, but at all different levels. And we're going to get to that at the end of the presentation too, to recognize the role that everybody has to play when setting up a healthy environment and creating healthy behaviors to control our risks for heart disease, for stroke, basically for all chronic disease, and to make everyday life just a little bit easier. So I'm going to get started by talking a little bit about who Heart and Stroke is. So just a really quick intro before we dive into diet about the Heart and Stroke Foundation. Our vision is life uninterrupted by heart disease and stroke. And we achieve this vision through our mission of promoting health, saving lives, and enhancing recovery. Everything that we do at the Heart and Stroke Foundation is aimed at our goals to improve the health of people in Canada by decreasing risk factors for heart disease and stroke. And so risk factors could be many different things, modifiable or non-modifiable. And we know that diet is definitely one of those modifiable risk factors. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, to give you the skill, the knowledge, the tools to help make some changes within your lifestyle and reduce your risk for heart disease and for stroke. I just wanted to let you guys all know about some of the changes that we've seen over the past year. As everyone is well aware, there's been a lot of need to pivot to a more virtual world with the pandemic. And so Heart and Stroke has done the same. We have really looked at some virtual supports for our constituents. So people at risk for heart disease or stroke, or people living with those conditions as well. And so two that I wanted to mention to you today were the power of community. We have an online peer support system, which is two different groups. So peer-to-peer support groups, one for people living with chronic disease, and then one for peer supporters of those individuals. And these are private groups that are moderated by the Heart and Stroke Foundation and allows for that peer-to-peer connection, which especially during the pandemic, when we're not getting that social interaction, we really know that there's a lot of power to the psychosocial support that can be provided by connecting with people who are going through similar situations to your own. We also have a newsletter that can get you more involved in research opportunities or in advocacy opportunities. So if you are interested in any of those, you can visit the website, heartandstroke.ca/connect to learn more. And then something new that we just recently developed in response to a need that we heard from our constituents is a virtual healthcare checklist. So you can find this infographic on our website, and it will give you a definition about what virtual care is, a good understanding on how to prepare for any virtual healthcare sessions you do have coming up, getting the right technology connected, how to get the most out of that session, and what to do after the session. So really supporting you to cope with some of the changes that you're experiencing that may increase your own stress during the pandemic. Now, February is Heart Month, and so on the same trend of going virtual, for 70 years, Heart and Stroke has been doing our door-to-door canvas. So it started way back when a group of cardiologists and businessmen decided to go door to door and knock on some doors to request some money towards research in the area of cardiology, recognizing that we needed more research to see change in what was happening with our heart health. And so 70 years, this has been going strong, and this is the first year that Heart and Stroke, in response to the pandemic, has shifted away from the door-to-door canvas, and we are now looking at a virtual canvas. So with the virtual canvas, if you are interested in helping out, heartandstroke.ca/help, where you can make a donation, or you can do your door-to-door canvases by knocking on those virtual doors of your friends and family. With Heart Month, we also know that it's a time to really shine the light on heart health. And part of that is knowing more about your own personal risks. We know 80% of premature heart disease and stroke can be prevented through healthy lifestyle behaviors. Those are habits like eating healthy, being active, living smoke-free, managing your stress. All of those factors have a huge impact on our health. And so this is a great month to start to take that inventory and look at where you may have some risks and what you can do to lead a healthier life and decrease those risks. And so with diet being one of those preventable risk factors, let's dive in a little bit more. And I encourage you throughout the presentation today to do some internal self-reflection and see where there's little tidbits of things we talk about you may be able to apply to your own life and slowly make changes towards a healthier eating habit that can reduce some of your risks for heart disease and for stroke. So that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to dive into what is healthy eating. We'll talk a little bit about Canada's food guide, and then we'll look at some of those diet trends. There are 3 dietary patterns that have significant evidence around them to support our health. That's Mediterranean, Nash, and Mind. So we're going to talk in a little bit of detail about those. And then we're going to look at what are diet fads and how do we know if a diet trend is just a fad diet? Is it good for us? Is it not good for us? Should we be adopted into our lifestyle or not? And we'll touch a little bit on celebrity endorsements. We'll finish up with supportive environments and then leave a little bit of time for some questions and discussion as well. So what is healthy eating? I think you guys are all waiting for me to tell you the magic pill of healthy eating. And you're going to be a little bit disappointed right now when I remind you that we all know what healthy eating is. It's not really a surprise. It's not that fad, sexy, fun message that we hear on social media or through celebrity endorsements. There's no super secret to what healthy eating is. Healthy, balanced eating is what we know. It's a little bit boring, but it's really good for us. It's a variety of fruits and vegetables. It's looking at more whole grains more often or whole grain alternatives. Proteins from a variety of sources. So looking at including more plant-based proteins more often from things like beans, lentils, nuts, but also including the lower fat dairy alternatives, lean meats, poultry, and fish. It's limiting the highly processed foods and eating regular meals. And I want to take a really quick second to focus on those last 2 points. So what are highly processed foods? Kind of as a buzzword lately that we're hearing a lot about, these highly processed foods. So let's distinguish what that is. Minimally processed foods are something that we all enjoy and that we can continue to enjoy. Those minimally processed foods are often single ingredient foods or some mixed products that are still recognizable and that has maintained most of its nutritional properties. So an example of a minimally processed food would be something like canned tomatoes or canned beans, frozen vegetables, some of those foods that are not in their natural form anymore, but they're still going to be really great options and offer the same nutrition as if they were in their natural form. Definitely something that we want to include more in our diet. So really focusing on the whole, the natural, and the minimally processed foods. Highly processed foods are something that we want to be more aware of. Highly processed foods are multi-ingredient foods. Sometimes they're not recognizable as the original plant or animal source anymore. They contain additives, artificial flavorings, and sometimes some chemical ingredients as well. So these highly processed foods tend to be more of the snack foods that we see. They can be beverages like sugary drinks are considered a highly processed food. And then also they can be some of those pre-prepared meals, frozen meals, for example, something like your processed chicken burger, breaded chicken burger that you can buy frozen would be considered a highly processed food. Something like your potato chips would be considered a highly processed food. So those highly processed foods are where we want to really focus on our attention on, limiting the highly processed foods and including more of the whole natural, minimally processed. We also know that highly processed foods are the highest source for saturated fat and for sodium in the Canadian diet. So we don't really want to be as nutrient focused. We know it's not necessarily a healthy habit to be very nutrient focused. So by taking steps to reduce your intake of highly processed foods, you're naturally going to be reducing your intake of some of those nutrients like saturated fat and sodium. So you don't have to be as concerned about the nutrients. And we can take a step back and look at the foods that we eat, the foods we enjoy, and the food habits that we have. Now, I want to also quickly touch on the regular intake of food by talking about skipping meals. And so we know that breakfast and lunch are 2 meals that often get skipped and working from home, maybe being at home more often with the pandemic, some people find that they're getting more better at making more foods at home and eating more regular foods, more meals. But some people actually report that that's the exact opposite of what's happening. And they're finding that their personal, professional, volunteer worlds are all combining and they're having less regular meals. We know that when you skip a meal, you're oftentimes restricting what your body's really needing for fuel. And when we don't have that fuel that our muscles and our brain need, it can actually decrease your capacity to concentrate and it can affect your memory. And that's because your brain is being deprived of fuel. When we look at fuel, we get our calories from carbohydrates, from protein, and from fat. And we know that carbohydrates are the main source of fuel for our brain and for our muscles. So if we're not giving our brain that source of fuel, we start to see some changes. When our blood sugars are affected, it does affect the way that our body manages different hormones and different functions internally. So that can lead to irritability, it can lead to headaches, it can lead to feelings of weakness, it can increase your vulnerability to stress, and it can actually have an effect on you achieving or maintaining a healthy weight. So we really want to make sure that we're giving our body the proper nourishment that we need and that we're eating regularly throughout the day. So let's look a little bit now at Canada's Food Guide. And we know that just a couple of years ago, Canada's Food Guide was revised. So it might be something new for you to see today. But again, it's going back to that same basic message that we're going to hear over and over today. Canada's Food Guide has gotten away from looking at portions and proportions and serving sizes. And now we're really looking just at that plate. So half of your plate is full of fruits and vegetables. A quarter of your plate would be protein foods. So you've seen now that the dairy, the meat, the beans, the plant-based proteins, they're all going to be put together into one area of the plate, the protein foods. And then a quarter of your plate is going to be whole grain foods. The beverage that we're going to choose most often is going to be water. So trying to eyeball your meals and your snacks and just look for this type of a makeup when you're looking at what you're eating. The guiding principles for Health Canada when they made the food guide were to include a variety of nutritious foods and beverages as the foundation for healthy eating. Processed and prepared foods and beverages that are high in sodium, sugar, and saturated fat can undermine healthy eating. And this is something really key and new for Health Canada to highly promote in the way they are. And that's that knowledge and skills are needed to navigate the complex food environment and to support healthy eating. And so we're going to come back to that factor in a little bit. Let's look at those guiding principles in more detail. Regular intake of fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and protein-rich foods, especially plant-based sources of protein. And so this recommendation from Health Canada is a shift towards more plant-based foods. Now, that doesn't mean that you cannot enjoy animal products if you choose to, but it means to try and include more plant-based proteins into your diet when you can. Filling half your plate with the vegetables and the fruit, looking at the whole grains. Whole grain is just that. It's the entire grain. So if we look at a kernel of wheat, for example, that kernel of wheat, if you take out the outer part of it, the endosperm, you take out the germ and the bran on the bottom, what you're left is with a refined grain. And so that's going to be what we see, for example, with our white flour. And when we took off the outer shell and the bottom of that grain, we took out the healthy fats, we took out the vitamins and the minerals, and we also took off the fiber, which is really key. So choosing whole grains is a great way to ensure that you're maximizing your nutrition from that grain product. And then that variety of proteins from a variety of different sources. When we go back and there's a little bit deeper into the message around choosing a variety of foods and beverages, the food guide really recommends water on a regular basis. So when you are thirsty with and in between your meals, water should be the drink of choice. With this, Health Canada is also looking at ensuring that clean water is readily available for all Canadians, which is a really vital piece to accessible food and drink, and it's really a human rights issue. So great to see Health Canada working on that. When we look at this is where we know that we want to be choosing water as our beverage of choice over some of those sugary drinks. And we're going to come back to talk about sugar in a second, but if you're looking for more information and you're really interested in the area of added sugar, you can visit Heart & Stroke's website. Under our position statements, we have a fact sheet on liquid candy, which talks about all of the current evidence and research around sugary drinks and our health. So to put that in perspective for you, I'll do a really quick highlight. Heart and Stroke Foundation recommends that no more than 10% of our calories come from sugar. So for the average adult consuming around a 2,000 calorie per day diet, that would be no more than 12 teaspoons of added sugar per day. So really key to note that we're talking about added sugar, not the natural sugars found in our fruits or our dairy or our legumes. But these are the added sugars that are added to enhance the sweetness of food and beverages. Many of you are probably thinking, there's no way that I have 12 teaspoons of sugar a day. That's a lot. So let's put that into some perspective really quickly for you. The number one source of added sugar in the Canadian diet is coming from sugar-sweetened beverages. The most common sugary drink that we'll think about would be pop. So one can of pop has 10 teaspoons of sugar. So we're almost at that maximum of 12 with just one can of pop. But let's look at some of those beverages that are hiding behind health claims. Let's look at a sports drink, for example. One sports drink also has 10 teaspoons of sugar. Now, for some people, a sports drink may be warranted, and that's going to be if you're working, if you're being active at a very intense level for greater than 1 hour. After that 1 hour mark, your body's going to need to replace some of the energy and give it that instant fuel. And that's where the sports drink, it's been designed with 10 teaspoons of easy to access broken down sugars that your body can start to use for fuel to continue that activity. So for somebody in that situation, that would be this would be a good choice. Only 2% of our North American population will actually work at a level that would warrant a sports drink. So keep that in mind. And that would mean that for the majority of us, that sports drink is just going to be a sugary drink with a high amount of sugar consumed in a short period of time without a lot of nutritional benefit for us. Other beverages hiding behind the health claims, we may see a lot of those vitamin waters or those flavored waters out there. Many of them have about 9 teaspoons of sugar per serving. If we look at flavored coffees or flavored teas, they can have up to 20 teaspoons of sugar in a medium or a large size. If we look at energy drinks also about 23, 24 teaspoons of sugar in a large can of an energy drink. And again, these are all beverages that have high amounts of sugar consumed in a short period of time without a lot of nutritional benefit. We also know that it doesn't give us the same feeling of fullness. So that means that regardless of the calories that we have drank with these beverages, we're still going to eat the same amount of calories throughout the day regardless, because it's not giving us that feeling of satiety and it's not balancing with other nutrients that our body needs to help. So just being aware of those sugary drinks and the added sugar is a really great step. It's provided through Health Canada with Canada's Food Guide, but also with the Heart and Stroke Foundation's position statement on sugar. But we also recognize that Canada's Food Guide is now more than just a plate. So this is really exciting that Health Canada has taken food beyond just what we eat and is looking at our healthy habits as well. We know food nourishes our body. We know that we need to eat for that physiological need, but there's so much more to food than just nutrients. We know that food has a cultural role. It has a social role. Food plays many different roles in our lives, and we want to respect that and honor that as well. When we look at some guidance that's being put out there now from the Food Guide, it talks a lot more about being mindful of your eating habits. So being aware of when you're eating, we often multitask now, we eat in front of screens, which takes us away, and we're now not as mindful about our habits. So take that time to eat. Listen to your body. Notice when you're hungry. Notice when you're full. Your body has that natural ability to tell you what it wants, but because of our rush lifestyle, we often lose the ability to recognize those signals. So being more mindful can help you get more out of the practice of eating, but can also help you to listen to your body and your body's cues in a much more effective way. We also know there's a huge benefit to eating with others. So sharing your meals with others, sharing your food traditions across generations, across cultures, there's so much great rich conversation that can happen and sharing over a meal So respecting and honoring the fact that food plays a social role in our lives as well. And for people who live alone, you can still have that, especially now in a digital age where we can share a meal virtually, join cooking classes virtually. So there is ways to stay connected to others, share those food traditions and your meals with others in that way. So I want to have a really quick activity before we jump into the fad diet part of the conversation, which I know is why you all came tonight, but just to really, again, reinforce that mindfulness, I thought we would do a quick activity about why we eat. So if you want to participate, this is your opportunity. No need to, you don't have to, but I would like it if a few people did. And we're going to recognize why we eat, because there's different types of hunger. Hunger isn't just our stomach telling us, hey, I need some nourishment. Hunger can happen from the stomach. It can also happen from the heart. So that would be emotional eating, for example. And it can happen from the mouth. So eating just because of the habit of it. Let's look at some examples of that. When you think about why you eat, what comes to mind? Can anyone throw out some examples of why you might eat?
Hungry.
So you're eating because you're hungry. So that's actually stomach hunger. You're eating because your body's actually telling you, hey, I need some nourishment. I need some fuel. I'd like to eat now. But not always hunger. What else? What other reasons would we eat for?
We have people typing bored or stress.
Yeah, so if you're bored, that could be either heart or mouth hunger. If you're feeling stressed, that's going to be heart hunger. I don't actually see the chat box.
Oh, I can read it for you.
Comfort,
craving.
So if you're having a craving, it could be stomach hunger, but it could also be heart hunger. So when we're having a craving for something, we have to kind of take that step back and evaluate what we're craving and why we're craving it.
Tired or worried.
Mm-hmm. So that's again going to be heart hunger. Tired is a really great one. So actually all of our hormones are interconnected internally. And so when we're tired, your body is very smart, but sometimes not too smart. So when you're actually really tired, your body is recognizing some of these signals that you're tired, and it doesn't know, is it sleep that you need or is it fuel that you need? So sometimes being tired can actually signal hunger in that way as well. Oh, Rhea, you're still on mute.
All right, that's all of them. I think we got everybody.
Okay. Thanks. So a lot of people recognize some emotions for why we eat, so that heart hunger. It could also be things like we're celebrating. How many people would eat because you're at a party? How many people would eat because you've been invited to someone's house, and that's going to be more of a mouth hunger or a heart hunger? It's not necessarily a bad thing, but if someone's offered you to try something, you're going to try that. Maybe it's because your coworker has a bowl of jelly beans out, and every time you walk by their desk, maybe not during COVID, but maybe pre-COVID, you would grab those jelly beans. So there's a lot of different ways that we eat because we see it, it's there. And a lot of times what we're eating, the reason we're eating is not actually that physiological need for food. It's more related to our emotion, to our habits, to our social environment, to our cultural environment, or just to our societal needs. So recognizing why you eat is the first step in being more mindful about your eating habits. Now, I'm not saying don't eat for a celebration. Don't eat because you're happy. Don't eat because you're bored. Don't eat because it's in front of you. But be mindful of that activity. And the more mindful you and aware you are of why you're eating and when you're eating, the more likely you'll be able to control the amounts, portions, and you may choose not to actually eat and to choose a different activity instead. So I'm not going to dive too much into this today because this is a whole other presentation all on its own, but I want to take this opportunity to really introduce mindful eating to you, and something to keep in mind too as we look through the diet trends, which tend to be more focused on the physiological need and on weight. So we want to remember that there's so many different reasons that we do eat beyond just those two factors. So let's look at some of those diet trends. When we look at diet patterns, I already mentioned to you, there's a lot of diets out there, and I've just listed a couple of them here as examples. And they are diets that some may have a specific need depending on a health condition or depending on an age or depending on your personal circumstances. But for general use, these diets don't have a lot of evidence to support, and they can be harmful. So if you are looking at some of those fad diets, you want to ensure that you are working with a health professional to ensure that you're still meeting your nutrient needs and mitigating that risk. But there are 3 dietary patterns that have sufficient evidence to support. So let's take a few seconds to look at those. The Mediterranean diet was first studied back in the 60s. So this dietary pattern has been around the longest, and it has the most support for it. The original research looked at the eating habits of people living in Greece and Italy compared to the eating habits of people in Northern Europe and the US. And some of the big differences to note that they found in the original research was the more intake of plant-based proteins and plant-based foods in Greece and Italy compared to Northern Europe and the US. When they looked at these different eating habits and the way that the Mediterranean folks were eating, they did expand beyond Greece and Italy to look at other countries in the Mediterranean region as well. And they found that there was a reduced risk for heart disease, cancer, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's. There was lower LDL cholesterol. And LDL cholesterol, you can think of it as the lousy cholesterol. That's the cholesterol that we want to keep in a lower amount in our bodies. And then there was also a lower blood pressure in people who ate according to the Mediterranean dietary patterns. So this diet actually focuses on the cooking styles and the lifestyle habits traditional to people living in the Mediterranean areas. So let's just have a real quick overview. I don't want to, again, get too detailed. If you're really interested, Heart and Stroke's website, as well as many other health publications, have a lot of details on how to adopt this dietary pattern. But let's just look at overall, what does this look like? The Mediterranean diet looks at daily intake of vegetables, fruits, whole grains, nuts and seeds, olive oil in the place of butter and margarine, twice a week fish intake, and then weekly intake of beans and eggs. It has moderate dairy intake, and it flavors with herbs instead of salt. It really looks at limiting red meat and sweets. It has the occasional glass of wine, and it focuses on eating together with friends and family. So this is a quick snapshot of what the Mediterranean diet looks like. Now I'm going to go over the next 2 diets, and we can come back to how to incorporate some of these habits into your lifestyle. But I want to mention that even adopting parts of the Mediterranean diet has shown benefit when it comes to heart health and other chronic conditions. The DASH diet is the dietary approach to stop hypertension. So the DASH diet is a little bit more newer compared to the Mediterranean diet. And the DASH diet looked at 3 different dietary patterns. It looked at the DASH diet, which we're going to talk about in a second. It looked at a diet that was higher in fruits and vegetables. And then it looked at the typical North American diet. When it compared those 3 diets, they found that the DASH diet and the diet that was higher in fruits and vegetables both reduced blood pressure within only 2 weeks of adopting this dietary pattern. So it had a direct relationship on hypertension or high blood pressure. The DASH diet, with further research, has actually now gone into 2 forms. It was the DASH and the DASH with a sodium restriction. And the DASH with sodium restriction had even more benefits for blood pressure, but also looked at decreasing lower total cholesterol and LDL cholesterol. It decreased your risk for osteoporosis and also for diabetes. A recent study from the American Journal of Preventative Medicine also found that closely following the DASH with sodium restriction diet could lower your risk for heart failure as well. So the reason that this diet works is because the combination of specific nutrients, and that's looking at an adequate intake of potassium, calcium, magnesium, combined with higher intake of fiber and lower intake of sodium. And that's what makes this diet work. When we look at the DASH diet is more focused on servings of different types of foods. So it looks at having 4 to 5 servings of vegetables, 4 to 5 servings of fruit per week or per day. It looks at 7 to 8 servings of whole grains. So again, not looking at those refined grains, but really focusing on those whole grains. 2 to 3 servings per day of lower fat dairy. So that's going to be a slightly higher intake of dairy compared to the Mediterranean, and that's because of the calcium that we're requiring for this dietary pattern. It looks at 2 or less servings of lean meats or fish per day, but 4 to 5 servings of nuts, seeds, and beans. So looking at a different type of plant-based protein daily, as well as looking at healthy fats. So that's the basis of the DASH diet. Now, the third dietary pattern I want to talk about is called the MIND diet. And the MIND diet is a combination of DASH and Mediterranean diet. And this dietary approach looks at neurodegenerative delay. So the MIND diet is the newest of all these diets. The MIND diet was published in 2015, and it happened over 4.5 years that they studied 1,000 individuals following this specific way of eating. And the MIND diet looks at top 10 foods to include daily. And so after 4.5 years of following these 1,000 people who ate these top 10 foods daily, they saw a reduction in Alzheimer's disease of 53%. So a dramatic decrease in your risk for Alzheimer's disease. But let's take note again that even just partially following this dietary pattern, so even incorporating more of these foods more often, saw a benefit in decreasing cognitive decline. It saw a 35% decrease in risk for cognitive decline. So even just some of these patterns from these 3 diets are showing a lot of benefit. Now, this diet is fairly new, great evidence to support it though. And what's exciting is that this year will conclude a 5-year clinical trial from the National Institute on Aging, looking at 600 seniors who followed the MIND diet. So we're going to see even more research and more evolution on the MIND diet as we can continue to look at the evidence. So these 3 diets, oops, I forgot to tell you what the MIND diet was. The MIND diet, those 10 foods that we're looking at, daily intake of leafy greens, vegetables, whole grains, nuts, olive oil, and a glass of wine. Once a week, you're going to have seafood or fish. Twice a week, berries and poultry. 3 times a week, you have beans. So again, you're seeing that there's going to be more of a focus on some of those plant-based foods here. On the MIND diet, they recommend to really limit red meat, butter and margarine, cheese, pastries, sweets, and fried foods. So I can see, for the few of you, I can see some of you are scrambling to take notes. And I want to really remind you again that even adopting parts of these dietary patterns into your lifestyle will show benefit. So when we look at what diet is best for you, there are many different ways to eat. And you want to focus on a dietary pattern that meets your needs and your preferences. So even taking pieces of those 3 dietary patterns that we've talked about today can have benefits. If you are interested in slowly making those changes to adopt one of these 3 dietary patterns, as I mentioned, our website at Heart and Stroke, as well as many other health organizations out there, can give you some of those details. And if you're looking for some guidance, reaching out to a dietitian is always a really helpful way to ensure that you're doing it properly. So I wanted to now talk more about how we can incorporate this, because for some of us, you're thinking this is great information, but now actually putting that knowledge into practice is a little bit more difficult. So we don't want to change everything overnight. It's not realistic, and it's probably not going to be sustainable for us. So looking at, these are just some examples that I've put together on how you can take pieces of what we talked about and maybe start to incorporate those into your lifestyle. Looking at more plant-based foods. So maybe looking at ensuring that there's a vegetable or a fruit at every meal and snack that you consume. Maybe looking at having a variety of colors of vegetables in each of your meals, lunch and dinner. Maybe looking at choosing some of those apples, berries, or bananas as part of your snack, an easy go-to snack, including fruit as your dessert, adding unsalted nuts and seeds to your snack, to your salads, or to your baking, choosing to add some legumes to your diet 1, 2, or maybe 3 times a week. If you're someone who has not really added some of those plant-based proteins to your diet before, and you're a little bit more hesitant, maybe your family is a meat-eating family, as some people like to say, trying to slowly add some of those legumes by pairing them with your, by pairing them with your meats is a great way to start to introduce new foods. It's a technique that we use with children when we're talking about introducing new foods, but it definitely works for adults as well. So pairing new foods with foods that you know you enjoy, start to introduce and accept them more readily. Plus, it's COVID times, food's expensive, and we want to extend that meat budget. So let's try and add some legumes, some beans, some lentils to our meat to extend that meat budget. So for example, if you're making ground beef or ground chicken for your turkey tacos or for your ground beef nachos or whatever you're going to be having, let's add some lentils to that. They mix in really nicely. They'll cook very quickly. So with that ground meat, it can be great. If you're choosing canned, no problem, drain and rinse. Buy the lower sodium can, but then by draining and rinsing, you're removing about 40% of the sodium from that can as well. So try and add those quick, easy plant-based proteins, foods that you already know that you enjoy. Pairing them will help you to be more accepting. And then as time goes on, you may want to try a just strictly plant-based protein in your meal and see if you can enjoy that as well. Looking for whole grains more often. So a little tip here is that oats and quinoa are always whole grain. So give your mind a break. You don't have to look for that whole grain word on oats or quinoa, but on other grains like couscous, barley, rice, pasta, let's look for those words whole grain so that we know that all those great nutrients are included. Something else we've noticed in all three of these dietary patterns is that they all look at reducing your sodium intake. So sodium and salt, they're used interchangeably. Salt is salt is salt. So whether you're looking at table salt, sea salt, kosher salt, seasoning salt, Himalayan pink salts, all those salts have the same, very, very similar, almost the same amount of sodium. And it's sodium when consumed in excess that can be harmful for our health. As we talked about already with the Nash diet, we know that high sodium intake is related to high blood pressure for about a third of people who have high blood pressure. So trying to decrease your sodium by flavoring your foods with herbs and spices, by tasting your food before you use the salt shaker, and then by remembering that key message I told you earlier about how the majority of our salt that we do eat comes from those highly processed foods. So limiting those highly processed foods can make a really great impact. Well, making more food at home where you can control the ingredients. Now, I don't have a clock on my screen, so I'm just going to check my time. Okay, so we got about 5 more minutes, and I wanted to talk about the trends and the fads. So before you adopt any food trend, whether it's something that's really evidence strong, like the Mediterranean diet, or whether it's something that we're not too sure about, but the celebrities are doing it and they seem to have a lot of energy and look great. So we want to take whatever you are thinking about adopting into your diet as a food trend, and let's look at 3 different factors. Because when these 3 factors combine, that's when we can actually see behavior change. So let's look at knowledge. What are we going to do and why are we doing it? Let's look at skills. How are we going to do it? Do I have the ability to do this? And then motivation. Is it important to me? And am I confident in making these changes? And this is a great reminder from what we talked about earlier about how Canada's Food Guide now talks about knowledge and skills. Together, knowledge and skills are needed to navigate the complex food environment and to support healthy eating. So for example, actually, we're going to do an example later, so I'm not going to say it now. I also want you to think about some of those food trends and start to really put your detective hat on. Remember that there's no good or bad food. There's also no superfood. There's also no food that's completely forbidden. And we also need to be aware of serving size and frequency. So as soon as we see a food trend that's pitting a food as good or bad, or telling you can never eat this food or you should only eat that food, it's a really big red flag for us, because we do know that we need a variety of foods to complement our nutrition needs, but we also recognize all of the different effects on food and diet outside of just the physiological need. So nothing is ever going to be forbidden, and there's not going to be one superfood that's going to meet all of our nutrient needs. So be aware of those things. And then also when we're looking at serving size and frequency, it goes in both ways. So if you are looking at really restricting your serving sizes and the frequency of eating, if you're noticing that you're really hungry all the time and irritable, like we talked about earlier, you're likely not meeting your nutrition needs, and your diet or dietary trend that you're following is going to be too restrictive. and you're not fueling your body in the best way possible. So that's something to be aware of as well. But also if your serving size are very large of one specific food item. So if you notice that you're having a lot of one thing, but not a lot of another, and the frequency of some of those other foods is very small, then that's also something to think about to make sure that you're actually getting the complement of nutrients that you need. So questions to ask yourself when you're evaluating this food trend: does it follow a healthy plate? Is it sustainable for you? Is this something that you can actually stick with long term? Is it going to be affordable for you? And will this diet make it socially isolate you? So is it something that's going to impact your ability to relate to food in that social, in that cultural, in the other aspects of our eating habits? And then if you have any questions, and if you're still not sure after you've done this evaluation, there's always lots of supports out there. Dial a Dietitian is currently on hold with COVID, but hopefully within the next few months, we will see that reactivated. And Dial a Dietitian is a free provincial program where you can call between the hours of 8 and 6 and talk to a dietitian to ask your questions, like these questions you may be having a hard time navigating with your food trends. So let's do a quick example. So I chose the raw diet because I think it's an easy one that we can all understand. So I've chose the raw diet to evaluate. So we're looking at this. So what is this diet? This diet is called the raw diet. We're thinking we might try and eat this way because Gwyneth Paltrow eats this way and she knows everything, right? So we're going to say, okay, we're going to try this. We're doing it because of celebrity endorsement, and we're doing it because we think it's going to be something that's healthy for us in the long term. So let's evaluate that diet now. So let's look at the why. What is the benefit of this for us? What is our motivation or our ability to actually eat this way? So we look into the raw diet and we notice there's some great fiber intake. It's decreasing my processed food intake. There's some good antioxidants in these foods. So there's lots of positive things happening. But then when we looked a little bit more into it, we realized there's actually no evidence to support eating this way. It's going to be a little bit more difficult to get enough protein because the only proteins that you're allowed to eat on the raw diet are nuts and seeds, because the raw animal proteins that you may be able to eat actually are a high risk for foodborne illness. And so that might not be a positive thing for us. And we know that it could lead to constipation and malnutrition as well. So now looking at this, our understanding of the what has increased, and the why we want to do it is now being questioned. And the how we're going to do it is starting to look a little bit more tricky. Our ability to eat this way might not be as easy as we thought. So then we realized that the bottom line is that heating food doesn't change the way our body digests it. Our enzymes are there to work to digest food and absorb food, whether they're raw or cooked, and that we are risking some malnutrition and may need a supplement if we do choose to eat this way. So we've learned about that diet. We've looked for some of those red flags and we've identified that. So now we've noticed, you know what, we're not going to actually go into this food fad. Maybe we did notice that it had the higher fiber intake, and we can get that by including more raw vegetables in our snacks. So we can take pieces out of this, but maybe not actually adopting this dietary pattern fully. So let's look at a little bit more on celebrity endorsement, because there's a lot of celebrities out there that do endorse diets, and we do want to be aware of that. So when you hear, and by celebrities, I mean influencers as well. Social media is, I read a thing the other day that said the only superpower that food has is the superpower of social media. And so looking at how our influencers through social media, our influencers, whether celebrities or athletes or people we look up to, we still want to be wary about what they're recommending. And so here are some key red flags for you to look for if there's a weight loss promise. So we know that changing the way that you're eating habits, your dietary patterns, the foods that you're choosing, that changes your behaviors, but weight is not a behavior. So there's no guarantee that the outcome is actually going to be weight loss. So we want to look at, we're changing these behaviors for multiple reasons, and the outcome, one of those outcomes may be weight, but it may not be, and everybody is different. Everybody's lifestyle is different, everybody's physiology is different. So you can't actually make a promise of weight loss with a diet. And if it does, it's probably a red flag that it's really just trying to play on some insecurities. Restricting specific foods without a reason is a very big red flag, because there's a lot of different foods out there that offer us a variety of nutrients. And restricting a large group of foods means that we're not going to be getting those specific nutrients to create that nice balance that we need. If a diet promotes starvation or dehydration, not only is there a huge risk there, but it also teaches your body to stop listening to its hunger cues. So that's going to be another big red flag. If that diet comes with meal replacements and supplements, especially if they're sold by the diet company, it's a big red flag that that diet company is looking for a profit and probably not your health, and that you're focusing on a supplement or a replacement instead of real food, which is the best place to get our nutrients. And if a diet combines by making physical activity a punishment, it's also a red flag. We move our bodies because it feels good. We move our bodies to feel strong, to get more confidence, to have better quality of sleep, to see better posture. We move our bodies for a variety of reasons that help with everyday living, but you should never move your body as a punishment for what you eat. And you should also never move your body to offset what you're eating. So taking physical activity and nutrition and separating them in that way is going to be really helpful. And when diets combine them and pit nutrition and physical activity against each other, it's a good sign that it's probably not a healthy way to approach your lifestyle. So the main message is to aim for a dietary pattern that's sustainable, that fits with your routine, and also with your preferences. It should not be physically or emotionally dangerous. And I've been saying dietary pattern on purpose because we know that those diets that are promoted as for weight loss or for a specific fad, those diets, more than 90% of people who follow a diet are going to regain any weight that they did lose within a year. We know that they're very tricky to follow. And so it's not going to be sustainable. And oftentimes it's not going to be nourishing your body in the way that you need. So let's take a step away from diets and instead let's look at our lifestyle and putting pieces of evidence into our lifestyle to help make it a healthier lifestyle for us. It's going to be different for everybody because everybody is different. So now just to quickly wrap this all up before we go into questions, I wanted to remind you that a lot of today has been about you. What are you doing? What are your habits? What are you buying? What are you eating? And so I wanted to remind you that when it comes to health, it's not only on you. And so oftentimes people can really have some negative self-talk around their health because there's that big focus on pointing the finger. What did you do? What did you do wrong? What are you going to do? And so remembering that it's not just on you. And then when we look at supportive environment, education is really important, but it's very limited. And behavior change is really hard. When we look at behavior change, it's not just the individual, but we need to look at interpersonal, organizational, community, and public policy for support. So changing that food environment to make it a healthy environment where the easy choice is the healthy choice for Canadians, combined with the education, like we talked about today, is how we're actually going to see behavior change. This model, looking at all these different levels, promote nudges for people towards healthier choices. And so then the finger isn't pointed on you as harshly. You do control a certain amount, but there's all these other factors as well. And so Heart and Stroke works not only at awareness and education like we're doing tonight, but we work at all of these different levels to help create supportive environments for health. And so I wanted to wrap up by just reminding you about some of the great things that have been happening with Health Canada's healthy eating strategy. This eating strategy is the most comprehensive public policy approach strategy since the tobacco reduction strategy. And so there's lots of really great things that Health Canada has proposed. They've already accomplished some, and there's still some that we're keeping on pushing them towards finishing up. Things like trans fat regulations. Trans fat is no longer allowed in food products in Canada. And so that's a wonderful thing for our heart health. We know trans fat is an industrially produced fat that has no positive effect on our health. So now we know that we don't have to worry about trans fat in our food supply anymore because the government has taken care of that for us, making it, again, easier for us to make our own choices and know that we have a healthy food system. Sodium monitoring is in place, so looking at the sodium amounts in different foods and what the trends are within diet, working with food industry to look at sodium monitoring. Revisions to Canada's food guide have already happened. restricting food and beverage marketing to kids was well underway. Unfortunately, it was halted by some not moving forward. It didn't move forward because of some what am I thinking of? That word. Food industry came and had some opinions, which caused some more conversation. So we are still hoping that restricting food and beverage marketing to children will start up again, and hopefully after the next election, we'll see some more movement with that as well. After COVID has wrapped up, some of those priorities can resurface. And so then also looking at front of package labeling. And this is something that's really important because consumers want, and evidence shows that simple, visible, easy to understand labels on the front of package reduces your cognitive burden when you're purchasing your groceries. So for example, 79% of Canadians polled said that they would be in support of a high sugar warning on the front of package. And here on the bottom, I have two examples that you can find on Health Canada's website of proposed front of package labeling. So, again, a lot of research has gone into this already through Health Canada, and Heart and Stroke is continuing to support Health Canada at looking to put front of package labeling into play, where we will be easily able to see foods that are high in saturated fat, sugar, and sodium right there on the front of the package. So lots of things to help you in your healthy eating journey at all these different levels. And Heart and Stroke is here to help you as well. So if you visit our website, you'll find a lot of different recipes, all which have been vetted by our Heart and Stroke dietitians to ensure healthy nutrient makeup, to give you some ideas when you have recipe fatigue, or if you're trying to include more plant-based proteins, to just give you those different fun ideas to ensure that you're including healthy foods in your kitchen. And then if you want to learn more about sodium, about saturated fat, or about sugary drinks, and our position on those areas, you can find our position statements and fact sheets on our website as well. So I see now that I did go 5 minutes over time. So I really apologize. I hope that maybe some of you can stick around for another 5 minutes and we can open up the floor for some questions.
There is a couple questions already in the chat box, so I'll just pass those along to Amanda. So thanks for the presentation first. Someone is asking your thoughts on margarine and or butter, I would assume. So you can answer that, and then there's one more about water.
Sure. So when we're looking at the day-old question, I mean the age-old question about butter versus margarine, that is it's an interesting question, and I think people have gone back and forth, and science has gone back and forth, and what we've actually learned over the past maybe 5 to 7 years with newer research is that saturated fat itself may not be as harmful as we once thought. But the saturated fat, depending on the food that it's found in, may have more of an impact on our health. So I mentioned earlier that the majority of the saturated fat that the Canadians are consuming is coming from highly processed foods. And in highly processed foods, you tend to find higher amounts of saturated fat, but also higher amounts of salt and added sugar as well. So what the research is leading towards is that it's the food that the saturated fat is found in that may have more of an impact on our health than the saturated fat itself. So let's keep that in mind, that when we're looking at saturated fat, we want to keep that bigger picture perspective as well. So if you're looking at butter versus margarine, if you're having appropriate quantities, we don't really necessarily need to be as concerned about that. If you're putting butter or margarine on your steamed broccoli, you're doing a good thing. You're having that steamed broccoli, don't worry about it. If you're putting butter or margarine on an extra large cinnamon bun from the package from the grocery store, maybe we want to look at how much that cinnamon bun and how often we're eating it instead of the butter or the margarine, for example. And so that's just one example of how to look at it. When we look at the evidence, we know that margarine is made mainly from unsaturated fats. And although there is newer evidence around saturated fat, which is found in the butter, that's telling us that it might be the foods that it's in that is related to our health, we do know there is substantial evidence around unsaturated fat and its health benefits for our blood vessels and for our heart. So if you are choosing a margarine or a vegetable oil, that you're going to be having the fat that has some health benefits to it. But really when it comes down to it, if you're really enjoying a butter, And if you're having it in a smaller amount and you're looking at that bigger picture with all those whole, natural, minimally processed foods, it's not going to be a big deal.
So one other question here we have, what are your thoughts on drinking water? So how much? Cold water, warm water, hot water? Is there any kind of thought on that?
Yeah, you know what? It's going to be really personal preference. So it's the water itself that's going to be hydrating us. We lose water when we talk in our breath. We lose water when we sweat, or fluid, I guess, when we sweat, when we're active. We lose water by absorbing nutrients in food. We lose water when we're eliminating any toxins from our body, like when you pee, for example. So you lose water in so many different ways, and we just want to make sure that we're replacing that fluid with water. And so if you choose hot water or cold water, that's going to be up to you. There has been some things that have looked at the benefits of colder water because it burns more calories to warm that water up in your body, but there's really not a lot to that. So warm or cold water is going to be a personal preference. Personally, I drink warm water because cold water hurts my sensitive teeth. So it's very personal whether you choose warm or cold water or room temperature water. Just looking at choosing water as your fluid of choice. When we're looking at how much water to consume, the general guideline is for 8 to 9 cups of fluid per day. Now, keep in mind that you can get fluid from soup, you can get fluid from your milk. Even your coffee or your tea counts as fluid as long as it's not a high consumption. So for example, once you've had more than 4 cups of a regular strength drip coffee, now you may start to lose some fluid, so that you're not going to be counting anything over that as towards your fluid intake. But for most people who consume a moderate amount of tea or coffee, that's actually going to count as your fluid as well. So keeping all that in mind when we're looking at fluid. Water is going to be our go-to drink, but then you can also count some of those other sources as well. So 8 to 9 cups is the general rule. There's a lot of different ways to do it. Some people do it based on body weight. Some people do it based on the calories they consume. It's not overly complex about it. Let's just look at 8 to 9 cups of water. If you feel thirsty, you're already going into dehydration. So listen to your body, just like I mentioned with your hunger cues. Listen to your thirst as well. If you're thirsty, drink some water.
Okay. There's a few more questions, so I don't know how many more we've got time to take, but we'll maybe try and give quick answers for them. I don't know. We'll see, Amanda. Someone's asking about, maybe I'll just kind of throw all of them out there, and maybe it's one answer. So someone's asking kind of if eggs should be eaten every day. Another person's asking about their sodium content for the day. And then someone's asking the difference between, I just had a long question pop up. Hang on. Lean ground beef versus extra lean ground beef. So those are full of them. And again, if we don't have time today, I think we'll always encourage you. We have a dietitian at the Reh-Fit Center, so you can take some time and book an appointment with her and ask her questions. And maybe Amanda, I think the Heart and Stroke website probably has great resources too. So
yeah, for sure. We have lots of different nutrition articles on our website where you can find some of this information. We do have a position statement on sodium, so you can check that out as well. I'll just give a real quick answer for some of those. For sodium, your needs are going to be 15 to 1800 milligrams of sodium per day. So it's a mineral that our body needs. It plays a vital role, but most of us consume way more than that. Consuming more than 2300 milligrams of sodium per day can start to have some adverse health consequences. So that's where I mentioned that high intakes of sodium can be related to high blood pressure. It can also cause some calcium to leach out of our bones, so thinning of the bones. If you have asthma, high intake of sodium can increase your asthmatic symptoms. So that's more than 2,300 milligrams. Most Canadians consume more than 3,000. So the majority of us are consuming way more sodium than what we actually need. So any reduction in sodium can be helpful for us. Now, those numbers are huge. So to put it into perspective for you, 2,300 milligrams, that maximum amount that we want or don't want to go over, is 1 teaspoon of salt. So 1 teaspoon of salt would be that maximum. Does that mean you can safely add 1 teaspoon of salt to your food? Unfortunately, no, because majority of our salt is coming from those processed foods, those restaurant foods. So although taking the salt shaker off the table, out of the kitchen, out of your cooking, that's going to be a quick, easy way to eliminate 11% of our sodium intake. we do know that the majority of our sodium intake comes from those processed foods. So that's where you want to put your attention. But really quick, good news is that our taste buds actually adapt the fastest to sodium out of any other flavor. So that means as you slowly decrease the salt in your diet, you can still taste that same salty flavor with less sodium. So that's a really good news. Just be patient with yourself, small steps to decrease your sodium intake, and you'll still get that salty flavor. It also means if you go back to one of those really high salty foods that you used to love, after a while of not having it, it's going to taste really salty and you're probably not going to enjoy it. Next question was about eggs. I think
yes.
how many eggs? Eggs are definitely an option for you. They are a great source of protein. They have some great vitamins and minerals in there as well. Do be aware though that they are higher in saturated fat. Eggs had a really bad rep because of the cholesterol, and that was old evidence, old research. We've come a long way since then. So we now know that the cholesterol that we eat has a minimal impact on our body's cholesterol. And it's actually the saturated fat that we eat that it can affect our body's blood cholesterol. So our bodies produce our cholesterol in our liver. So the cholesterol that we eat, our bodies, for most people, will regulate by what you're producing based on what you're eating. For some people, it can impact about maybe 20%, but it's still very minimal. So when we're looking at cholesterol from eggs, it's not something we need to be as concerned about, but it is still a source of saturated fat. So you do want to be aware of that when we're looking at how often and how many eggs that we're consuming, but definitely they can be part of a healthy eating pattern.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, I forgot the third question.
Last one we'll take tonight. So thanks. Is there a big difference between lean ground beef and extra lean ground beef?
Yeah, so I would definitely recommend when you're looking at your meat options to choose the leaner options. So whether it's extra lean or lean, they're both going to be a leaner choice than regular. So very good. What you'll notice when you're cooking those up, so say you're frying up your meat, you'll notice there is a little bit more fat released from the lean versus the extra lean. But if that's what you prefer, that's fine. You can always drain that extra fat off as well. Some people may go as far as rinsing their meat to make sure that extra fat's gone. But in general, if you're choosing the extra lean or the lean, they're both going to be okay choices for you.
Great. Thanks very much, Amanda. I'm just going to thank everybody for tonight. Again, thanks, Amanda, for the great presentation. Lots of good information. I've heard you speak several times, and I will honestly say I learn something new every time I hear you, even if it's the same presentation sometimes, like we did those together. Just want to remind everybody that on Thursday, we have our Fit Talk with Dr. Shiva Shankar. Hopefully I'm saying that right. Treatment of acute ischemic stroke. So a little different take, but some great information coming up on Thursday. Want to wish everybody a great evening. Stay nice and warm. Again, thank you, Amanda, for your time tonight and for everybody joining us. And I will say goodnight to everybody and hopefully see you on our talk on Thursday. Thanks, Amanda.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.